Welcome to the Community Living Education Project's Sharing Possibilities for Community Connections Learning event. The Community Living Education Project, also known as CLEP, is a program through Rutgers School of Public Health. CLEP is committed to providing individual guidance, mentoring, and education regarding community living resources for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities living in the state of New Jersey. The CLEP team, many who are family members themselves, can serve as a bridge for families whose loved ones may be seeking residential supports outside of the family's home. To ensure the highest sound quality possible, all attendees will be muted during today's event. To interact with the host and presenter, please use your Q&A option on the bottom of the screen. Topic-specific questions will be addressed as long as time allows. For consideration to all of our attendees, we encourage you to keep questions as general as possible. Today's webinar, Promising Practices, the Basics of ABA, is being presented by Ms. Delia, Sequeira, in collaboration with the New Jersey Division of Developmental Disabilities. At this time, I would like to welcome today's presenter. Delia, welcome.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our workshop, Promising Practices, the Basics of ABA. This is part 2 of a 5-part series. If you missed our first part, it is available to be seen via internet through the Community Living Education Project website. If you have any questions about that, you can ask in the Q&A section for access. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about applied behavior analysis. It's a topic that some of you may have heard about, some of you may have in-depth knowledge about, and some of you may have never heard about. So today's presentation will cover just what I would say the tippy top of the iceberg regarding behavior and what is behavior and how we break down behavior as behavior analysts. So let's get started with that. All right, today's objectives are going to be to define behavior analysis as a detailed science of learning and describe the whys and hows of behavior and how behavior analysis helps to improve the quality of life by teaching new skills. If you were here watching us during the first webinar, one of the things you may have noticed is my constant use of the word teach. So you'll probably see that again this time around. Okay. So a little bit about me. My name is Delia Sequeira. Like Melanie said, I have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis. My undergrad work was in ABA, and I am now completing my doctoral degree in ABA. So as you guys can probably tell, ABA is pretty much all I do, but I do love it, and it has become a passion, not just a job. I've been a board certified assistant behavior analyst since 2004, and then became a board certified behavior analyst in 2007, and have been in the field working as a student since about 2001. So it's been a while, and most of my experience has been with adults. I have dabbled a little bit in the world of children and in the world of businesses. But currently I have been working in the state of New Jersey for about 12 years, first as a consultant through the developmental centers, and in the last 7 years as a trainer for DDD. And my focus is really to provide workshops around the state for provider agencies regarding behavior supports, and really looking at the science of ABA at a basic level so that there's dissemination about the topic, to disseminate correct information to those providing supports for adults with disabilities. As my work for DDD, I do provide a whole series of workshops. I do have 8. 3 of those workshops are geared towards direct support staff, and the remaining 5 DDD workshops are a part of a series that is geared towards staff and management positions or above. Those are 5 workshops that are different from this current collaboration with CLEP and Rutgers. And those are a little bit more involved, a little bit more in depth. Those workshops last anywhere between 2 to 3.5 hours. And we do have additional workshops available that are provided through our speech language pathologists in different topics to provide more information about services. So what is applied behavior analysis? Essentially, applied behavior analysis is the application of the science of human behavior And really, what we do in the realm of applied behavior analysis is deep dive into the detailed science of learning. So the aim is to improve socially important behavior by using interventions that are based upon those principles of learning theory. The interventions are usually evaluated repeatedly in experiments using reliable and objective measures. And we will be talking a little bit about that research-based foundation. The science can be applied in many different areas, such as developmental disabilities, medicine, fitness, workplace, traumatic brain injury, geriatric populations, and even in schools. So as you can see, the application of the science of learning and human behavior can be applied in almost any field that involves people. All right. So a little bit of history. Some of the work was first done in behaviorism in the even early 1900s, and it has continued to evolve and grow to this day. Different terms have been used in the past for behavior analysis, including behavior modification, behavior management, contingency management, or Skinnerian psychology. However, those names now often include or contain misleading, inaccurate, or negative connotations that do not apply to modern day behavior analysis. Some of you may also have heard the term M&M psychology. That's also one of those misleading, inaccurate terms. All right. Let's talk a little bit about ABA and how it's informed by research. Behavior analysis has two main branches. The first being experimental analysis of behavior, and this is where basic research is designed to add to the body of knowledge about behavior. Typically, it's done in labs. It can be done with both animals and humans, obviously with permissions. And that's where that information, those results that come out of the research can then be used as foundational information to use in the real world applications. What is applied behavior analysis then? It's that applied, that application of those foundations, right? Everyday life applications. And it's focused on real world interventions, real world situations that have been already addressed and been really looked at closely through the experimental side. And in this area, it's where most behavior analysts tend to work. So this actually goes right into the idea that ABA is an evidence-based practice. We do absolutely produce a lot of research, a lot of information, and these strategies are tested over and over again to address human behavior and improve the quality of life of people receiving treatments that are based on ABA. So what can ABA accomplish? Regarding appropriate behaviors, we can look at many different things, including increasing appropriate and socially important behaviors and teach new skills to people. That could be life skills, that could be communication skills, social skills. I did mention I worked a little bit in the business side of things. That also looked at business-related behavior, right? Work-related behavior. So you're looking at improvements in behavior at different stages. It can also help to maintain behaviors. So things such as self-control, self-monitoring procedures to maintain and generalize to job-related social skills. These are just examples of some of the things we can do. And then probably one of the bigger goals for many people is to then generalize those skills that are learned and transfer them to different situations as well. So for example, if I'm working with a young man that is learning to complete chores in his home, some of those skills can then be transferred over to maybe a job placement and being able to work somewhere because they've learned the skills needed to complete different tasks. Okay. A little bit more about what can ABA accomplish regarding inappropriate behaviors or challenging behaviors. It can also help to restrict or narrow the conditions under which interfering or challenging behaviors occur by modifying the learning environment. So really, we're truly looking at that. We're teaching, we're truly looking at trying to figure out how the person learns and really apply strategies that serve the person and our individualized strategies. So we're looking at that person, what their environment looks like, what teaching up strategies we can use to incur the process of learning. And we also look at the reduction of those interfering behaviors by teaching replacement behaviors and functional communication. So for example, looking at someone that engages in self-injury or aggression, property destruction, there's a reason for those behaviors. They allow the person to obtain specific outcomes. Well, then we come in, we assess the behavior, we try to figure out why it's happening, and then we find ways to teach a replacement in order for that person to still obtain the same outcomes, but through a socially acceptable behavior. So we're going to be looking at why ABA, why teach? Really, it's probably the most important tool we have to help someone have a better quality of life. So here are some points as to why we want to teach, why ABA can be really an important service to have in order to help other people. It helps the person that we're supporting to reach the highest level of independence possible, again, through teaching. And we really want to focus on that idea of abilities and capacities. What can the person do? What are they capable of doing? I think I mentioned in the first workshop that one of my probably biggest pet peeves working in this field is hearing someone say, Joey is who he is, he will never change, he can't learn anything, or we can't teach him new things. That's absolutely not true. Under the right circumstances, with the right strategies, we can absolutely teach someone new skills. What's going to be important to kind of take into consideration is their abilities and capacities. What can they do? And how much can we push just a little more for teaching, right? This will help to improve quality of life, increase noticeable signs of happiness, right? It can also help us integrate the people we support into the community with as little stigma as possible, right? Just a brief example, when I worked in Florida, I am a Floridian. I've been living, like I said, in New Jersey for about 12 years. And one of the gentlemen we worked with in the day program I started out at, one of the things he used to do is every time he saw a little piece of trash, he would have to pick it up wherever we went. So that's a minor behavior for most people, but if you think about it, it was really difficult to take them to different places, right? He would also kiss parts of walls. Again, it's kind of interfering to have these behaviors because for every wall that he saw, he would have to go and touch it and give it a kiss. Again, we don't know how exactly that behavior occurred, but we worked through assessing the behavior. We worked through teaching him a replacement skill. And so we were eventually able to take him into the community and not have those interfering behaviors impede his ability to go places, right? And basically stop us every second that this was occurring. So you really are looking at helping the person be integrated into the community. Once we were able to work with him to get him to reduce those behaviors, he wasn't looked at as that weird guy that was touching things or kissing things, right? If we took him to the mall, that no longer was happening, and that was important. For each client to reach their full potential, again, this is a little bit different than independent, but we're still looking at those abilities, capacities, what can the person do, what the possibilities are, what can we help them reach. And lastly, we want to provide the best services while also respecting the client's wishes. We have to remember we work with adults and there is a certain level of independence that they can have in their world, and they can absolutely let you know when something that is happening they don't like. And so we really want to also observe that, monitor that, make sure that what strategies we're implementing, what we're teaching is also something that the person is involved in. So there's some level of voluntariness that we have to address when looking at these services. Okay, so let's start talking about behavior. Like I said earlier, this is going to barely scratch the tippy top surface of what behavior analysts can do, how we can look at behavior, we can assess it. And I'm just going to give you a tiny little summary of what we do. If you're interested in learning more, contact your support coordinator. There will be an email address you can contact me at. I can maybe help you with looking at some resources or references that you can look at if you want to learn more about behavior analysis. So what does behavior do for us? What is behavior? Let's start there. Behavior is everything that we do. And one of the biggest things that I have to address with most people that take my workshops is the connotation behind the word behavior. A lot of people have a negative connotation that's been attached to that word. And that's just not the case. In our realm of behavior analysis, behavior is every single thing a person does. That includes inappropriate behaviors, appropriate behaviors, external behaviors, and also internal, what is happening within, because we do engage in some internal behaviors such as thinking, right? Or other events that occur internally. So knowing that, what does behavior do for us? At a very, very basic level, behavior does have reasons for occurring, and that kind of expands through the levels of complexity of a human being. So all behavior serves a purpose. That means everything that we do has a reason for occurring. Behavior is everything we do, like I said, and the purpose, the reason for why behavior happens, both appropriate and inappropriate, is called function, meaning that there is a function to behavior. At the most basic level, the most biological basic behavior, the most basic biological reasons for behavior to occur, it's either to obtain something we absolutely need, what we want, or what we like, or to get away from, escape things that we don't like, don't want, don't need. So you really break it down to that very basic biological level of access or escape, right? Either you have too little of something or you have too much of something. And we're working off of that balance for humans. So let's look at function. So I'm going to look at and try to explain a little bit how behavior is broken down to different parts, and these parts have names. So we're looking at behavior as the bigger piece, and each of these little pieces that fit in to make that relationship. And this is called a functional relationship. Behavior is comprised of motivation, antecedents, behavior, and consequences. So we're going to look at all of these pieces very, very lightly, but hopefully it'll make sense at some level by the time we're done with today's presentation. Okay. So let's talk about motivation first. So what is motivation? Well, in the world of behavior analysts, it means something just a little bit different than for most people, the general population. For us, motivation is really looking at environmental variables that have an effect on a person's behavior based on their specific wants and needs. So we just talked briefly about wants and needs based on the idea of access or escape, right? So these environmental variables, and when I talk about the environment, I mean everything that surrounds us, right? So in this case, the room I'm in, the apartment I'm in, the state I'm in, the planet I'm in, and even up to the universe, right? But also everything that is within is part of our environment. We're gathering information from both sides, inside and outside the skin. So these changes, these environmental variables or changes often affect us in different ways. And it really depends on how we're perceiving this information. So these environmental variables can have an effect on the effectiveness of outcomes and also the frequency of behavior that's occurring. If this doesn't make sense to you right now, that is a-okay. We're gonna work our way through the process. So hopefully that'll help you by the time we're done. So the two words that I want to focus on for this little section are the words satiation and deprivation. We talked about access and escape, right? why would we want to access anything, whether it's attention, whether it's food, whether it's drink, whether it's sleep? Because we're a little bit deprived of it, and there's a need for it. There's a basic human need for it. Why would we be satiated with something? Because we've had too much. And sometimes too much is not something that we want, right? Sometimes too much is actually a little aversive for us. So we engage in behaviors to make things end. So for example, I don't like to be in the sun for too long because it makes me feel bad, right? I start getting sunburned, I get very hot, I get very sweaty, I get a little exasperated. So what happens when I find myself in the sun for too long? I start to feel satiated with that feeling of sun on my skin. And so I engage in behaviors to get away from the sun, escape. I've had too much. I don't mind a good 10, 15 minutes in the sun. Anything beyond that, we have to start looking for different alternate plans for me, right? So these are the things that are happening in our world all the time. Our bodies are adjusting to all the variables happening around us and within us. So that's what we call motivation. And motivation is really the engine that drives human behavior, because based on these needs and where we are, that's going to get us to engage in different behaviors to achieve different outcomes. And really, this goes from the most basic behavior to the most complex that we have in our repertoire as humans. So let's look at these basic human needs that kind of drive behavior. Now, motivation is, for the most part, based on our basic human needs, but along the way, humans do an incredible thing. We learn about our environment, and we attach a value to the different things in our world. So not only are we looking at basic human needs that drive behavior, but also learned needs that occur over time. And I'll give you a great example of that in a minute. So based on our biology, based on our basic physiology, humans have these basic human needs: food, water, sleep, activity, right? You need your brain to be stimulated, oxygen, sex, or sex for the production of, or the continuation of the species, warmth, so temperature, warmth, coolness, and also painful stimulus or pain events. We want to get away from that. We're not big fans of being in pain. And a great way as a visual to kind of look at these human needs, I like this idea of looking at them as if they're little fuel gauges. We have all of these basic human needs kind of going on at the same time internally, right? I'm going to give some visuals for you guys. And every one of these needs are either at full, empty, or somewhere in between all the time. But when we kind of think about what's satiated, what's deprived, or most satiated or most deprived, those are the ones that start to help us prioritize what behaviors we're engaging in. And that is not always something you're conscious about. Sometimes those things occur kind of naturally without even thinking about it. So in this case, I have an example. This person right here, hunger is somewhere in the middle. They're not too hungry, they're not full, but they're comfortable. Sleep, they've rested, they've had a great night of sleep, so they're not tired, they have no need for sleep. But look at what thirst is. Thirst is kind of at the bottom, it's at empty. So based on this kind of visual, this perception of thirst for this person, we can start to make a good educated guess about what the person may be doing soon. And it may be looking for something to drink, because what are they feeling? That thirst, right? And there are signs for thirst. There's dry mouth, discomfort, right? Those things, or maybe for some people, even headaches. Once you get too dehydrated, you get into the world of headaches, stomach aches. For some people, it also may induce a feeling of hunger, even though they're not hungry, they're thirsty. And so what do we start to do? We start attending to our environment. Right now, I can tell you, I am a little bit thirsty. And so as I'm talking to you guys, my attention also starts to drift a little bit into something that's right next to me, my cup of coffee, right? So I have a little bit of coffee in my cup left, and I am absolutely looking at it because I am a little thirsty. So now that makes me engage with my environment. My thirst, feeling that dry mouth, evokes the behavior of picking up my cup, taking it to my lips, and taking a little sip of coffee. Now, what happens when I drink that coffee? My goodness, I feel better, right? My mouth is no longer dry. I've now fulfilled the need that I've had for a couple of minutes, and I do feel better. So look at just the process from now. I'm not even done explaining all the pieces, but you get to see that the things that we do have purpose, even when they don't look like it. They have purpose for the person engaging in that behavior. All right, so I talked a little bit about how needs are also learned over time. And one of the things that we have now that I'm going to give you a little example of, it has become a need for many of us, right? So I'll show you my phone, right? What does the phone do for us? One, if I lose it, I feel like I've lost my arm. Obviously, that's not true. I haven't lost the physical part of me, but it's become such an important piece of my functional world that I have developed this as kind of one of these needs. So if I am deprived of my phone for too long, that becomes an issue. I start to engage in behaviors to do what? Search for my phone, look for it. Also because this learned need has direct tie-ins to these basic principles, right? What can a phone do for us? It can allow us to access activity. I play a game on my phone that I absolutely love. It allows us to make communication or have communication with other people. So there's that attention component that is very much a basic human need, interaction with others. And so even something as simple as I'm hungry, well, I can look at a couple of apps on my phone and place an order for dinner, right? Or for lunch in this case. So look at how we've connected this thing that is just an object directly to these basic human needs, and therefore it develops some value, right? That can really end up in that world of deprivation or satiation. Satiation with the phone, for many people it's rare. I know I achieve it after maybe an hour of just, scrolling down social media. After a certain amount of time, I say, I'm done. I've had enough. Guess what? I engage in behaviors to do what? Put it away, make it stop, make it end. So that's an example of motivation. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you guys. I know we're kind of deep diving a little bit into how we look at behavior, how we break it down, but hopefully it'll all come together in the end. So motivation is the driving engine. Let's look at the next piece. The next piece is antecedents, right? I mentioned the word earlier when I talked about my coffee, and it's that my thirst makes me attend to different things in the environment, right? And based on my needs, based on what's happening internally, that's gonna help me attend to different things in the environment. And so antecedents are the thing that we're attending to. Antecedents, some people have called them triggers in the past. I like to personally steer away from calling them triggers because antecedents are truly pieces of information in the environment that we obtain through our senses. So they're environmental events, pieces of information in the environment that we process through our sensory organs. So I can smell something. I can see something. In this case, I'm pointing at the light in my bedroom. I can smell my coffee, right? I can see my mug. Hearing, I can hear myself talking. I can hear the air conditioning running on behind me. I know it's a little cool outside, but I get warm when I talk, so I do have my air on. I can touch, right? I can touch different things. I can taste. All of these senses allow you to intake information from the environment. Internally, we're also obtaining information through our senses, and a lot of it is through that touch, right? Because internally we feel things with all the cells connected to our nervous system. So these antecedents, the sight of these pieces of information can evoke behavior or they can suppress behavior based on what's going on. In the case of me being thirsty, seeing my mug, right, evokes my behavior of picking it up because inside there's some coffee that I see, that I smell, and once I take a sip, that I can taste. So if you take a second with me, I'm gonna take a sip of my coffee. Feel free to take a sip of whatever liquid you have in front of you at the moment. Okay, so these antecedents are the things that kind of set off the behavior, set off the action. They evoke it or they suppress it based on what's going on, right? Okay, so now let's look at behavior. So we talked about motivation. Motivation is the driving force because of the basic human need. The antecedents are the ones that kind of, the pieces of information that tell us what outcome is available, what outcome is possible. In the case of my mug, seeing that there's some coffee in there tells me that the outcome that I'm looking for, which is the liquid to reduce my thirst, is available. So I engage in the behavior to access it. Here's another brief example of suppression. I mentioned that it can also suppress behavior. Well, I'm talking to you guys right now. I can't really be on my phone. That would be very inappropriate. However, there's a little thing that happened here. And yes, that's Ellie and can't remember his name, but it's up. I got a text from a friend. That is a signal. That's telling me that there's a piece of information available only if I slide that little text message on, right? But because I'm talking to you guys, this is not a priority. This is not something I'm going to be doing. I need to attend to you guys. So the sight of that text message at the moment, because I'm doing this, is not going to be looked at. So there is behavior that is being suppressed because of the environmental variables happening at the moment. Okay, so let's look at behavior. What is behavior? It's everything a person does. It includes internal behavior and external behavior. An easy way that I like to remember, if it ends in an ing and it's a verb, it's behavior. That means that everything we do is in there. It all gets tossed in, including inappropriate and appropriate behaviors. Most behavior can be observed and measured, and this is going to be something really important to remember as we go through the next and upcoming webinars where we talk about data, where we talk about behavior support plans, because we need to really look at the process of observing and measuring behavior in order to know, in order to be able to determine if a person is learning or if behavior is changing in different directions. Behavior results from a person's immediate and past experiences, meaning they're learning. So when I talk about learning, if somebody has learned something, that means that behavior has changed. Learning and behavior change are the same thing, essentially. So behavior always makes sense to the person doing that behavior. They are doing that behavior because it's effective for them. It allows them to achieve a certain outcome. Brief example, right? I said earlier, it's a little cool outside, but I'm still running my AC. Imagine that you are someone that's always cold. Would you like to be in this room with me right now? Probably not, right? You might sit with me and say, Delia, what is wrong with you? It's cold outside. It's chilly. Why do you have to have the AC on? Well, guess what? In my world, I get a little warm. My cheeks get a little red as I'm talking to people. You guys would have a ball with me if you sat with me in my live presentations because I am active and I'm moving and I'm pacing. So I get warm. Well, running the AC makes sense to me, right? It may not make sense to you, but because it has an effect on my world, on my environment, on the way I'm feeling, I'm running that AC. If at any point I have to turn it off because I do get cold, I'll let you guys know, but that's not happening right now. So the behavior makes sense to the person doing it. And this actually goes right into the same idea for challenging behaviors. If you are working with individuals or supporting individuals that have challenging behaviors that are pretty severe, such as aggression, self-injury, property destruction, guess what? The outcome is something they're looking for. The way that they're achieving that outcome works for them, and that's why these behaviors are occurring over time. So what we want to do is really try to break down the reason why, the purpose, so that we can figure out why that behavior is occurring, so we can teach a replacement behavior to achieve that similar outcome. Okay, behavior never happens for no reason or in a vacuum. I showed you guys that diagram. Motivation, antecedents, and consequences are the supporting variables to behavior. So that means that all these four pieces coming together form that functional relationship of behavior. that means it never happens standalone. There's always something happening to support that behavior or to get it to occur. What may happen is that it may just not be visible to us or directly visible. There may be internal events that are driving that behavior as well. And like I said, it allows the person to achieve specific outcomes or results. So let's talk about those outcomes. In our world, we call them consequences. Again, consequence is one of those words that brings some negative connotations. We're trying to shed that today. We're not going to look at consequences with the negative connotation that people usually throw in the mix, which is typically punishment. But in this case, in my world of behavior analyst, a consequence just means a result, and that can be a positive outcome or a negative outcome, but it's just an outcome for us, right? It always occurs after the behavior, and this is what really maintains behavior at the end of the day. We talked about those antecedents signaling the availability or no availability of different outcomes. So if there's no outcome, a behavior may not occur. If there is an outcome that's desired, that may evoke or get behavior to occur. So that's what we're really looking at. We're looking at all this chain of events that really keeps together the process of behavior. All right. So there are 3 types of consequences that we look at. We look at reinforcement, which strengthens behavior. We look at punishment, which weakens behavior, and extinction, which also weakens behavior. Punishment and extinction can also stop behavior. But because we're very limited with time today, I'm only going to be discussing reinforcement. Punishment and extinction get a little bit more complicated than the time that we have for that. But again, if you're interested in knowing a little bit more, or maybe if you'd like to attend the workshop where I break it down just a little bit more, you're more than welcome to email me and ask me about that. But today we're just going to briefly discuss a little bit what reinforcement is. So let's look at that now. Before we go into reinforcement though, I need to give you guys this very, very important slide. It's my helpful hint, and hopefully it will help you look at the terms that we're gonna be discussing a little bit better. So if you've heard the word reinforcement, you've probably also heard the terms positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. And I believe that there's a lot of confusion out in the general population about these 2 terms. There's confusion because of the terms positive and negative. Most people address that or see that as the words good and bad. However, for us behavior analysts or anyone working in this field, positive and negative do not mean good or bad. They're actually mathematical. They are additions and subtractions. Hence why in my little slide for you guys, I have positive with a little plus sign, negative with a little minus sign. So that's where we want to focus on. The idea that positive and negative do not mean good or bad for us. What they actually mean is addition or subtraction, meaning that the outcomes are something that are either added or subtracted from the person's environment. Okay, so now let's look at reinforcement. So what is reinforcement as an outcome? If an outcome for a behavior reinforces, that means that it will also strengthen, increase, and maintain those behaviors that allow that outcome to occur. It also means that the likelihood of that behavior occurring again in the future increases a little bit or strengthens as well. So one of those things that we want to really look at is that strengthening factor. And that strengthening factor occurs for both types of reinforcement. It occurs for both positive and negative reinforcement. So let's look at positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is when a behavior, and that could be either an appropriate or inappropriate behavior, because we can absolutely reinforce inappropriate behaviors inadvertently. So positive reinforcement is when a behavior is more likely to occur in the future because it has allowed a person to access, acquire, or get something that they like, want, or need. I'm hoping that you guys are seeing some of the connections with the stuff I was talking about earlier. Remember motivation and the purpose of behavior? It allows us to either escape or access. So in this case, reinforcement allows you to access. So let's look at some examples, right? Oh, I gave you guys this example already. I should have remembered that. All right, but let's look at it anyways, because now we're gonna break it down just a little bit more, and it's gonna be through a different, slightly different example. So in the motivation world, remember we talked about satiation and deprivation? Well, in this case, I was thirsty, right? What is thirst? It's the deprivation of liquids that we absolutely need to survive, right? That they help us stay alive and stay well. So thirst is the motivation. That's the driver for the series of events that are going to occur to access a particular outcome, which in this case, the outcome you want, the outcome that is desired, is to get a drink. So what are the antecedents then? The antecedents are the sight of a soda machine in this example, or for me, the sight of my mug, right? What's another antecedent? The feel of money in your pocket. If you have some change in your pocket and you feel that, that's also a piece of information that's telling you, signaling the potential availability of the outcome you desire. The dry mouth is also information, right? It's another antecedent that continues to get this process going. So these antecedents will evoke different behaviors. If I see a soda machine, based on all the things that are in place at the moment, I am now going to walk over to the machine, get the money out of my pocket and put it in the slot, and press the button for the drink I would like to have. The outcome, ideally, as long as the machine is working, is going to be that I access a drink. Now, that drink, did I have that before? Not at all. I had to engage in these behaviors based on antecedents that evoke the behaviors, which were antecedents that stood out in my environment because I was thirsty, right? See how it all kind of clicks together? All of these things, all of these events come to that point of the access, right? The addition. I didn't have that drink before, but now I do. It's a piece of information. It's an item that has been added to my world, which I wanted. So you kind of can see how this chain forms together to get this outcome. And that is an example of positive reinforcement. The reinforcement here being the addition of the drink that you did not have before. So what is the value of drinks when we're thirsty? Pretty high, right? That value increases. The thirstier we get, the more valuable a drink becomes. So in this case, knowing this chain has occurred, what happens in the future? The next time you're thirsty and you happen to have some money in your pocket and you see a soda machine, what's the likelihood that you'll use that soda machine? It kind of goes up, right? That probability increases. And that's what we're also looking at. We're looking at the repeatability of behavior. That means behavior is predictable, right? It allows you to see kind of that pattern over time. But let me ask you a question. Here's another one. What happens if you're not thirsty, right? For some of us, seeing the soda machine will mean nothing at that moment. If I'm not thirsty, I will just walk by that machine without an issue. For some of us, it may mean, oh, you know what, maybe later I'll be thirsty and I'll still grab a drink. But the totality of those options, of those different options, still demonstrates a decrease in the probability of using that machine. So not being thirsty will have an effect on the value of the outcome, right? Not being thirsty decreases the value of drinks, but also not being thirsty decreases the probability that the behavior will occur. So that's why motivation is so important for us. We look at that driving force, the deprivation, that satiation, because that will have an effect on the value of the outcomes and the frequency or probability of that behavior. All right, let's look at an example of positive reinforcement of a challenging behavior, because I'm certain a lot of people are wanting to know how that can also happen. If you were here last time with us, I talked to you about Bill. Bill used to pull hair, and once we assessed the behavior well, we figured that the function was attention, right? And we worked with Bill. We taught him a replacement behavior, which in this case was tapping shoulders. He stopped pulling hair. But let's break down the first problem we saw with him, which was pulling hair, right? The motivation, because it was access to attention, that means that there was a deprivation of attention in his world. So Billy was bored. He was not getting a lot of attention. The antecedent for him was the sight of long ponytails. He really liked ponytails for some reason. That particular, we never got around to figuring out fully. We had some ideas, but the sight of a ponytail evoked his behavior of walking over to the person, pulling ponytail, right? What was the typical outcome of his pulling the ponytail? Was the person saying, ow, that hurt, Billy, that's not nice. It's not nice to pull hair, right? But look at what happened to his world. He went from being deprived of attention to all of a sudden getting a lot of interaction from someone, even if that interaction wasn't necessarily something that most of us would enjoy, right? We don't like to be reprimanded. But in his world, the words didn't matter. It was just the interaction. So that addition of the social interaction for him was what kept reinforcing his behavior of pulling the ponytails, right? So that's what we're looking at, that chain. So once we determined all of this happened, we were able to modify the environment, teach the new skill, and work on improving his world just a little bit, right? So in this case, what's the value of the activity or attention or something to do when one is bored? It's pretty high, right? If you're bored, you're looking for something to do. And I do have a saying for the people that attend my workshops. I always say a bored brain is pretty dangerous, right? A bored brain will find a way to entertain itself. And for some of us, that can be really appropriate activities. For others, it could be things like pulling hair, right? So what happens in the future? If we haven't changed the behavior at all, right? We have not intervened yet. What happens in the future the next time Billy's bored? He's likely to, if he sees a ponytail, if he sees someone walk by, that he'll try to pull their hair to access that outcome, right? To get that interaction that he's looking for. But what happens if he's not bored? What happens if he's had a whole hour of interacting with his parents and doing activities? If somebody walks by with a ponytail, it may not matter to him at all, because now that need has been met. He's had it a little bit satiated or a lot satiated, and so there's no need for that. So the other thing I want to point out is the importance of environmental changes, right? Not letting him be bored would have been also something to consider. And that's actually, with our intervention, we did do that with him as well. We included a lot more activities and enriched environment that helped them not become bored. But if he did need that interaction, we taught him to tap shoulders. Okay, so let's look at negative reinforcement, because we're soon running out of time. So I want to make sure that we get this all wrapped up in a decent amount of time for everyone. Negative reinforcement. So this is one that is often confused by people. I want to really address the point of negative being a subtraction here, not bad. So a behavior, and that again, like I gave you just the example of those two appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. A behavior is more likely to occur again because the behavior allows the person to stop and terminate or get away from something that they don't like, don't want, don't need, or find unpleasant. So look at that process. That's a whole different process than positive reinforcement, but both end up strengthening behavior. The big note here, negative reinforcement is not the same thing as punishment. This is the one thing that I see in so many places, from newscasts to different TV shows. They get this confused so much. And let's not even discuss Super Nanny. I'm not a fan, because a lot of this stuff gets incorrectly taught there. So negative reinforcement is not the same thing as punishment. So let's look at some examples of negative reinforcement, right? Motivation in this case, Sam is experiencing pain. In this case, that's a satiation. That's too much, right? If we have a headache or we are in pain, we typically don't like that. It's something we don't want. We want to get away from that, terminate it in some way. What have we learned over time, right? Our learning history also matters here. In this case, Sam's learning history is that if you are in pain, you could take a pain pill, right? Or a pain medication. In this case, ibuprofen. So for Sam, the antecedents, the pieces of information in her environment that are informing her next steps or evoking behavior are feeling the headache and seeing the bottle of ibuprofen. The availability of the potential outcome, which is reducing the pain, is informed by the presence of those antecedents. So if the antecedents are there, that evokes the behaviors of opening the bottle, taking the 2 ibuprofen pills as described, and ingesting them, right? Ideally, although this is a little bit removed in time, within 30 minutes, you should have some reduction of pain. And so if her headache is reduced, if she achieves the outcome she's looking for, what is that going to do for the remainder of the series? It will strengthen, right? The reduction of the pain will strengthen the behaviors of taking medication, will also add a little bit of importance or power to those antecedents, and also the motivation, right? It'll become a piece of information that's important for her. So the value of pain in this case has 0 value. We don't want any of that, right? What happens in the future? If she is negatively reinforced, meaning the subtraction of the headache, in the future, whenever Sam has another headache, she's going to be looking for that bottle of ibuprofen in order to take that medication in order to achieve the same outcome. What happens if she's not in pain? If Sam is just having a great day, is she even looking for that bottle of ibuprofen? Probably not, right? So behaviors don't happen because the pain isn't there. So look at those probabilities. Okay, let's look at an example of negative reinforcement from a challenging behavior side of things. So the motivation in this case is Mary. Mary is bothered by loud music. Someone in her home is listening to really loud music, right? That's a satiation. I'm sure many of us have been there when something is playing too loud. I live in with my boyfriend, and sometimes he watches those football games way too loud while I'm trying to work, and I get bothered too. So in this case, Mary, right, is bothered by the really loud music. What's the antecedent in this case that will evoke her challenging behavior? She sees the radio where that music is coming from. All of this stuff that may have come from her learning history. So remember, past learning and experiences also drive future behavior, hence the predictability factor. So what's the behavior that's evoked when she sees that radio? She walks over to that radio and throws it on the floor and she breaks it. What happens immediately when you throw that radio on the floor is that music stops, right? The music stops playing. So essentially, the outcome is exactly what Mary wanted. She ended that music. She's no longer bothered. But in this case, the behavior of breaking something is reinforced because it allows her to end that loud music that she doesn't want. When a behavior analyst comes in to look at challenging behaviors, we're looking for this breakdown. That's what we're doing. And like I said, this is just the tippy top of the iceberg because there's so much more that we look at and there's so many variables that we have to take on to really understand the behavior. But right now, breaking the radio is reinforced. And you could see it happening again in the future if another item is playing loud music, right? It could be a TV, it could be another radio, it could be a Bluetooth speaker, you name it. Okay, so hopefully this helped a little bit to kind of break down how we see behavior, the predictability factor, the value of the outcomes, how behavior is either suppressed or evoked, right? If there is no music playing and Mary is fine and she sees the radio, there's no need to walk to it and break it. So that behavior is suppressed, right? The antecedent is not really going to be evoking behavior. There's no behavior to evoke because there's nothing affecting her on that motivation side. And there's no need for that outcome. So we start looking at all these pieces to help to figure out how to teach. In this case, what could we teach Mary? Well, we can tell her if to communicate, right? We could teach her to communicate in a way that it would let us know, I don't want this music, right? So it could be, say she couldn't communicate vocally, maybe we could teach her the sign for break. So break from the music, or we can teach her to independently walk away from the area and go to a quieter area. All the things that could then prevent the target behavior, the challenging behavior, and still allow her that same outcome. All right. So the function of behavior, we kind of wrap up back to that realm, looking at that reason, the purpose. Function refers to the effect that the behavior has on the environment. Function is really the most important piece when we're looking at what we're going to teach, how we're going to change behavior, because we need to know the reason why the challenging behavior happens, right? And if we're looking at skills to improve, we also want to know function, because then we could teach because we know the function, we know what outcome is desired. And we can determine function by looking at the motivation, the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequences, just like we did now with those examples of reinforcement. And in the behavior analytic world, we've looked at 4 main functions of behavior. And those main functions you are likely to find in different, if you've already worked with the person you're supporting, looking at behavior support plans or different kinds of evaluations, you may have heard some of these terms already. Some of you may not have. So let me just go over them briefly. These 4 functions of behavior are kind of the drivers, right? Along with motivation. So we have attention. So access to attention would be a function. Access to tangibles would be a function. Escape, and a sensory automatic function. So this right here, I think a good way to think about them is kind of going back to that satiation deprivation world, right? Why would someone engage in a behavior to access attention? Because they're deprived. Why would someone engage in behaviors to access tangibles or things? Because they're deprived. Why would someone engage in behaviors to escape? Because there's too much, right? There's some satiation. And the sensory function is probably the most difficult one to assess because it's typically events that are occurring internally for the person. We can do it. It takes a little bit more investigating, a little bit more specific assessments that we look at. We won't deep dive into that right now because it would open up another maybe 3-4 hours of discussion that we don't have anymore. But typically behavior that's driven by internal events. The example of Sam and her headache could kind of be in that realm, along with some escape, right? She's trying to escape the pain, but the event is occurring internally. So that behavior is driven from that sense, that function. All right, so what are we looking to teach? I've been talking about this, right, quite often. Functional equivalent or replacement, it's an interchangeable term for me at least. Skills, so functional skills that we want to look for to that are equivalent to the challenging behavior or replacement skills to that challenging behavior, right? Those skills are taught as appropriate replacements, and they absolutely should be function-based because you want to teach that person to achieve the outcome they're looking for through an appropriate behavior, right? Through a socially acceptable behavior. And that is really what we're driving towards. That whole teaching factor is the most critical piece to help someone have a better quality of life. So my final thoughts are, always remember behavior is observable, measurable, and we will be talking quite a bit about observable and measurable in the workshop where we talk about data collection. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more, please come to the remaining parts of the series. We're gonna deep dive just a little bit more, you know, within an hour setup, but you know, it'll hopefully give you a nice little basic introduction to some of these topics. We'll talk a lot more about data collection and the importance of that, and observable and measurable are key features of that. And the thing is that behavior can be changed under the right conditions. So really you're looking at teaching. That word will never leave my mouth until I'm done being a behavior analyst. And I don't think I'll be done being a behavior analyst until long time from now. So what is our job? Our job is to observe and understand the function of behavior in order to reduce challenging behaviors and increase socially significant behaviors. So that is my final thoughts for today. I want to remind you that the remaining part of the webinar is still with part 3, part 4, and part 5. Part 1 is available to be viewed, so I have added a little bit of that here, but part 3 is arranging the environment to create positive interactions. So we're going to look at how creating positive interactions can really help to modify just the environment for people and maybe suppress some challenging behaviors just from that area, right? But we still want to focus on teaching no matter what. Then part 4 is going to be the importance of behavior assessment and behavior support plans, as well as part 5, the data webinar. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned for those. Please join us for those webinars. So I am done for today. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. If you have any further questions, please feel free to email me. Again, just a little reminder, this was just the tippy top of the iceberg of what I do as a behavior analyst, but hopefully you got a little sense, or a little better sense, of how all of this works. So I'm going to now send it over to Melanie, and she'll give you some last comments for you. Thank you, everybody, for being here today.
Thank you, everyone. And everyone, please note that Delia's email is on her screen. We will make it a point of attaching today's PowerPoint to the follow-up email that you can expect within the next 24 hours. Delia, everyone is giving many thanks to you and information that you were able to provide us today. As always, a wonderful, easy to understand presentation that's super valuable for both families and professionals. So as always, we thank you for your time and dedication to the community. As everyone signs off of today's webinar, you're going to notice that a brief survey is going to pop up. It takes maybe 30 seconds to complete. It's information that you provide us that's really going to allow us to better form and arrange future presentations to best address your needs. So again, thank you everyone for joining us. Delia, as always, thank you. And we will see everyone during the next webinar series. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.